Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. There are records that official history tries to bury 6 feet deep. Tonight, we are unsealing a file that was never meant to exist. Case File 73B, a forgotten event, known in the deepest circles as the Echo Canyon disappearance, the case that refused to stay closed. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be shut again. Deep within the forgotten folds of the American Pacific Northwest, nestled between impenetrable forests and jagged, unforgiving canyons, lies the town of Havenwood. It does not appear on most modern maps. GPS signals falter and die as you approach its periphery, surrendering to the oppressive silence of ancient pines. To find Havenwood is not a matter of navigation, but of intention, or perhaps of being led. The town was founded in the late 1800s by a reclusive congregation seeking isolation from a world they believed was spiraling into moral decay. They found their sanctuary, but what they built was less a town and more a terrarium, a perfectly sealed ecosystem of secrets and shared history. The architecture is a relic. Clapboard houses with steep, gabled roofs lean into one another like tired old men sharing a whispered confidence. The paint is peeling, the wood is groaning, and the windows watch you with a vacant, cataract-like glaze. For generations, the bloodlines in Havenwood have remained pure, the stories have remained local, and the distrust of outsiders has been cultivated like a prize-winning crop. They say time moves differently here. The seasons seem to linger, autumn's decay holding on long into winter's grasp, and the silence is a physical presence, broken only by the caw of a raven or the distant moan of wind through the canyon passes. This isolation was the town's shield, but it also became its cage. When something went wrong in Havenwood, there was nowhere to run, and no one to call for help. The law was a distant concept, a formality handled by a single county sheriff, who rarely ventured past the old logging trail that served as the town's only artery to the outside world. The people of Havenwood solved their own problems, buried their own dead, and kept their own counsel. It is a place that has perfected the art of forgetting, of collectively agreeing that some things are better left undisturbed, buried under the thick carpet of pine needles and decades of unspoken agreements. This is the stage for our story, a community so tightly wound that when one string snapped, the entire instrument fell silent. Because in 1978, a family of 4 did not just disappear from their home. They were erased from the very fabric of this insular reality, leaving behind a vacuum that pulled in whispers, theories, and a darkness that the town is still trying to keep at bay. This is the story of the Blackwoods, and the town that time, and the truth, tried to forget. October 14, 1978, began as an unremarkable autumn day in Havenwood. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The sky was a sheet of pewter gray, threatening a rain that never came. This was the last day the Blackwood family, Arthur, Eleanor, and their children, 10-year-old Lily and 7-year-old Samuel, were seen alive. Arthur Blackwood was an anomaly in Havenwood. While others worked the failing timber mills or tended to their land, Arthur was a historian, a man obsessed with the town's esoteric past. He spent his days in the dusty municipal archives, poring over brittle founding documents and forgotten journals. His wife, Eleanor, was a botanist, equally enthralled by the region's unique and often unclassified flora. They were considered oddities by the locals, educated, quiet, and content in their own world. Their small, isolated house sat on the edge of town, bordering the vast, dark expanse of the national forest. According to the initial police report, File 78304, the day was painfully normal. Arthur was seen leaving the archives around noon, carrying a heavy leather-bound ledger. Eleanor had spent the morning in the woods, collecting specimens. The children were last seen playing in their yard, their laughter echoing faintly across the meadow. The town's postman, Elias Vance, delivered a small package to their porch at 2:15 p.m. He noted that the family's dog, a golden retriever named Rusty, was barking incessantly from inside the house, something he found unusual. The last confirmed sighting came from a neighbor, Martha Higgins, who saw the family's station wagon pulling out of their driveway just before sunset. She couldn't see who was driving. Then, silence. When Sheriff Brody was finally called to the residence 2 days later, alerted by a concerned colleague of Arthur's, he found a scene of unsettling stillness. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was immaculate, save for the dining room table, which was set for 4. A pot of stew sat cold on the stove. Half-eaten bowls were on the table, as if the family had been interrupted mid-meal and simply vanished. The dog, Rusty, was found locked in the master bedroom, dehydrated but unharmed. In the children's room, a drawing lay on the floor. It depicted their family standing in front of their house, but beside them, looming amongst the trees, was a tall, unnaturally thin figure with no discernible features. It was rendered in black crayon, a stark, terrifying slash against the cheerful drawing of a family. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no ransom note. Every personal belonging, wallets, keys, purses, was still in the house. It was as if 4 people had simply evaporated into the cold October air, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense of profound dread. The first tangible piece of evidence in the Blackwood disappearance surfaced 72 hours after they were last seen. It wasn't a clue that provided answers, but one that plunged the investigation deeper into ambiguity. On the morning of October 17th, a local hunter discovered the family's wood-paneled Ford LTD station wagon. It was parked precariously close to the edge of Serpent's Maw Canyon, a treacherous chasm nearly 1,000 feet deep, known for its violent winds and the churning river that carved its base. The location was miles from their home, accessible only by a winding, poorly maintained fire road. The scene, as documented in the case file's preliminary forensic report, was a study in contradictions. The car was unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the accessory position, which had drained the battery. The radio was on, tuned to a static-filled frequency. Inside, a child's sweater was folded neatly on the back seat. There were no fingerprints other than those of the family members. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no torn upholstery. It was as if the driver had simply pulled over, turned the engine off, and walked away with their family into the abyss. The search and rescue operation that followed was one of the largest in the county's history. Teams scoured the dense forest surrounding the canyon. K-9 units were brought in, but the dogs behaved erratically, whining and refusing to follow any scent trail past the vehicle's front bumper, as if the trail simply ceased to exist. Divers braved the treacherous currents of the river below, finding nothing but silt and rock. The search was extensive, exhaustive, and ultimately fruitless. But inside the car, investigators found one object that defied simple explanation. On the passenger seat lay Eleanor Blackwood's botany journal. It was open to the last entry, dated October 14th. The page contained a meticulously detailed sketch of a flower she had supposedly found that day. It was a species that baffled experts, a nocturnal bioluminescent fungus that resembled an orchid, but possessed properties unlike any known organism. Her notes in the margin were frantic, a stark contrast to her usually neat scientific script. She wrote of a low hum and a pale light emanating from a cave system hidden deep in the woods. The final sentence was scrawled and barely legible. Arthur was right. It isn't a story. It's a map. This strange entry provided the first hint that the family wasn't on a simple outing. It pointed towards a deliberate quest, a search for something hidden, something that connected Arthur's historical research with Eleanor's botanical discoveries. But with no family to question and no further leads, the investigation stalled. After 6 months of dead ends, the Blackwood case was officially closed, reclassified from a missing persons case to a probable murder-suicide or fatal accident at the canyon. The town of Havenwood breathed a collective, uneasy sigh of relief. The car was towed, the file was stored in an archive, and the silence returned. But the case was only sleeping. For 2 decades, the Blackwood file gathered dust in the cold storage of the county sheriff's department. It was a ghost story, a local legend told to frighten children, a tragedy that the town of Havenwood had successfully walled off and buried. The case was closed, the book was shut. But in 1998, a single phone call forced it wide open again. Elias Vance, the postman who had delivered the family's last package, was dying, riddled with cancer and a guilt that had gnawed at him for 20 years. He contacted the original lead detective, now a retired and weary man named Frank Miller. What he revealed was not in his official 1978 statement. His original testimony was brief and unremarkable. He saw the family car, delivered a package, heard the dog barking, and left. It was a lie of omission, a sin he could no longer carry to his grave. In this new, recorded confession, Vance's voice, thin and reedy, painted a far more sinister picture of that October afternoon. He stated that, as he was leaving the Blackwood property, he saw another vehicle parked about 100 yards down the secluded road, partially hidden by a thicket of birch trees. It was a black, government-style sedan, out of place in a town of pickup trucks and aging station wagons. Standing by the car was a man in a dark, ill-fitting suit, smoking a cigarette and watching the Blackwood house with an unnerving intensity. Vance, conditioned by Havenwood's culture of minding one's own business, had driven past without a word. But he said the man's eyes met his for a brief moment, and they were empty, like looking at a photograph. He was terrified. He said nothing in 1978 because he believed this man was connected to something powerful, something that could make a family of 4 disappear without a trace, and he had a family of his own to protect. Vance's deathbed confession was the first seismic tremor that cracked the foundation of the old investigation. It introduced a chilling new element: surveillance. It suggested the Blackwoods were not victims of a random act or a simple accident. They were being watched. They were a target. This revelation forced the county to reopen the case. Investigators, now armed with a new lead, re-examined the evidence. Arthur Blackwood's work was scrutinized more closely. They discovered his research wasn't just about the town's founding. It was about what the founders themselves were looking for. Rumors of strange geological formations and anomalous energy readings in the area, documented in the cryptic ledger he was seen with on his final day. Elias Vance's testimony transformed the narrative from a local tragedy into a potential conspiracy, reframing the family's disappearance as a possible abduction or a desperate flight from a faceless, powerful entity. The first witness had finally spoken his truth, and in doing so, he ensured this was a case that would refuse to stay closed. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be shut again. Narrator. Welcome back to the Obsidian Archive. In our last chapter, we detailed the disappearance of Elias Vance, a reclusive cartographer whose life's work vanished along with him in the fall of 1983. The initial investigation stalled, leaving behind a folder thick with unanswered questions and a single cryptic note. They found the frequency. For 2 years, that folder gathered dust. The world moved on. But the case didn't. It was waiting. And the heart of that wait was a 2-story colonial home at the end of a forgotten cul-de-sac, 114 Ridgeback Lane. From the outside, it was unremarkable. Beige siding, a neatly trimmed lawn that was beginning to overgrow, a welcoming red door. But to the investigators of the Sterling County Sheriff's Department, it was a puzzle box with no key. Detective Frank Harding, the lead on the Vance case, described it in his memoirs as a place that felt wrong on a structural level. Every room was meticulously organized, almost clinically sterile. Books on geodesy and theoretical physics were alphabetized on the shelves. Not a speck of dust on the furniture. Not a dish in the sink. It was the home of a man who seemed to have simply evaporated from a perfectly ordered life. But the order was a facade. In the basement, behind a false wall in the pantry, Harding's team found Vance's true workshop. It was a chaotic scene, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Maps were pinned to every surface, not of coastlines or countries, but of what appeared to be star charts overlaid with complex equations and strange branching lines that connected seemingly random points across North America. In the center of the room was a massive, custom-built radio transceiver, wires snaking from it, to a dozen different antennas. It was cold to the touch. It hadn't been powered on in weeks, maybe months. This is where the first official investigation failed. They cataloged the scene, took photos, and labeled the equipment as the hobby of an eccentric. They saw maps, not a message. They saw a radio, not a receiver for something beyond their comprehension. They missed the details. The floorboards beneath the desk were deeply scarred, not from a chair, but from something heavy being dragged. A single non-native pine needle was found near the ventilation shaft, despite the nearest pine forest being over 50 miles away. And then there were the clocks. Every single clock in the house, the digital display on the microwave, the grandfather clock in the hall, Vance's own wristwatch on the nightstand, was stopped at precisely 3:33 a.m. The official report logged this as a possible power surge. But the circuit breakers were never tripped. It was an anomaly they couldn't explain, so they chose to ignore it. They packed up their evidence bags, sealed the front door with tape, and declared the house on Ridgeback Lane a dormant crime scene. They believed the story ended there. They couldn't have been more wrong. The house was not an endpoint. It was a transmitter, waiting for a signal to return. Narrator: 2 years of silence. Elias Vance was a ghost, his home a sealed tomb of forgotten evidence. The case file was relegated to a cold case cabinet in the basement of the sheriff's department. But in the digital ether, something from Vance's world was still echoing. On October 17, 1985, a ham radio operator in rural Ohio named David Polk was scanning the shortwave bands, a nightly ritual. He was searching for distant stations, listening to the crackle and hiss of the ionosphere. Just after 2 a.m., he stumbled upon something that made the hair on his arms stand up. It wasn't a broadcast, not in the traditional sense. It was a loop, a faint, rhythmic pulse buried under layers of static. For exactly 33 minutes, the signal persisted. It was a sequence of numbers, read by a monotone, synthesized voice, followed by a burst of white noise, and then a strange, melodic humming that defied any known musical scale. Then the numbers would repeat. Polk, a meticulous record keeper, hit record on his reel-to-reel tape machine. That recording would become the key that unlocked the case, only to reveal 100 more locked doors behind it. Polk sent the tape to the FCC, who dismissed it as a likely numbers station, an anonymous shortwave station used to transmit coded messages to spies. While unsettling, they were not uncommon during the Cold War. But Polk was convinced it was something else. The frequency, 4825 kHz, was highly unusual for such broadcasts. More importantly, when he ran the audio through an early spectrographic analyzer, he found a hidden layer. Embedded within the white noise bursts was another signal, a faint, almost imperceptible voice. It was distorted, strained, but it was human. And it repeated a single phrase over and over, "Not for you, not for you." For months, the tape was a curiosity, a piece of radio folklore. Until it fell into the hands of Dr. Eris Thorne, a disgraced linguistics professor from Georgetown, who specialized in pre-colonial North American dialects. Thorne spent weeks cleaning the audio, isolating the humming sound that followed the numbers. He was convinced it wasn't melodic. It was phonetic, a lost language. Using cutting-edge and controversial pattern recognition software of his own design, he began to translate. The result was chilling. The humming wasn't just a sound. It was a set of coordinates, a location. When the coordinates were plotted on a map, they pointed to a desolate, uninhabited stretch of the Wharton State Forest, over 50 miles from Ridgeback Lane. When Detective Harding, now nearing retirement, was presented with this information by a persistent local journalist, he was skeptical. But one detail caught his attention. The journalist played him the original numbers sequence from Polk's tape. Harding felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He recognized the cadence. He couldn't place it at first, but his mind flashed back to the Vance house, to the basement workshop. It was the rhythmic ticking of the cooling fan on Elias Vance's custom-built transceiver. A sound that wasn't in any evidence log, but was seared into his memory. The machine in that basement wasn't just a receiver. It had sent something out. And now, 2 years later, something was answering back. Narrator: a set of coordinates derived from a phantom broadcast. A retired detective haunted by a cold case. It sounded like fiction. But on November 5, 1985, Detective Harding, acting unofficially, led a small private search team into the sprawling Wharton State Forest. They were armed with Dr. Thorne's translated coordinates, a compass, and a deep sense of unease. The location was deep within the Pine Barrens, a place steeped in folklore and notorious for disorienting even the most experienced outdoorsmen. The air grew still and cold as they pushed deeper, the sunlight struggling to pierce the dense canopy of pine. The coordinates didn't lead them to a clearing or a landmark. They led them to a tree. It was an ancient gnarled pitch pine, indistinguishable from thousands of others around it, except for one thing. Carved into the bark, almost healed over by time, was a symbol. It was the same complex branching symbol found on one of the star charts in Elias Vance's basement workshop. It was a marker. Harding knew they were in the right place. His team began a grid search, combing through the thick layer of pine needles and sandy soil. For hours they found nothing. No footprints, no campfire remains, no sign that any human had been there for decades. As dusk began to settle, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees, one of the volunteers' shovels struck something hard. It wasn't a rock, it was metal. They carefully excavated the area and unearthed a lead-lined box, about the size of a shoebox, buried 3 feet down. It was sealed with wax. There were no markings on the exterior. The air crackled with tension as Harding carefully pried the lid open. Inside, nestled in yellowed cotton, was not a weapon, or money, or documents. It was a geode, split perfectly in half. Its crystalline interior shimmered even in the fading light. But what was truly shocking was the object resting inside one of the halves. A small, brass compass. The needle, however, didn't point north. It spun erratically, as if caught in a powerful, localized magnetic field. Harding recognized it immediately. It was a custom piece from a photograph on Elias Vance's desk, a gift from his late father. This discovery shattered the foundation of the original investigation. This compass was logged as being in Vance's nightstand, sealed in an evidence bag back in 1983. There was no record of it ever being removed from the property room. Yet here it was, 50 miles away, buried under a cryptic symbol from a map that was also in evidence. It was impossible. It suggested one of two things. Either there was a catastrophic breach in the chain of custody, a level of corruption Harding couldn't fathom, or something far stranger was at play. The pine needle found in Vance's house suddenly made terrifying sense. He had been here, or at the very least, something belonging to him had. As they packed up their discovery, a cold wind swept through the pines, carrying with it what sounded like a faint whisper. The team told themselves it was just the wind, but Harding knew better. It was the sound of a case that was not only refusing to stay closed, but was actively pulling him back into its impossible depths. Narrator: an impossible discovery demanded an official response. The unearthing of the compass forced the Sterling County Sheriff's Department to publicly reopen the Elias Vance case. The media latched onto the story, drawn by the bizarre elements. The ghost broadcast, the cryptic maps, the buried treasure. For 6 weeks, a new task force re-examined every piece of evidence. They re-interviewed David Polk, the radio operator. They consulted with geologists about the geode. They brought in federal experts to look at the strange symbols. The public waited, expecting a revelation that would explain the last 2 years of high strangeness. What they got was a masterclass in bureaucratic misdirection. On January 10, 1986, Sheriff Raymond Clark held a press conference. The room was packed. Flanked by two stone-faced men in dark suits, Clark delivered the new official conclusion. His explanation was clean, concise, and utterly devoid of the mystery that had defined the case. According to the new report, Elias Vance had not been the victim of foul play. He was, they claimed, a paranoid recluse who had staged his own disappearance. The maps in his basement? The ramblings of a troubled mind? The radio broadcast? A pre-recorded message triggered by a timer? A final elaborate prank? The compass in the woods? Planted by Vance himself years prior during a hiking trip. They explained that Vance, using a hidden savings account, had likely fled the country to live a life of anonymity. The case was, for the second and final time, officially closed. When a reporter asked how the compass, an item in police evidence, ended up buried in the forest, the sheriff gave a chillingly simple answer. A clerical error in the evidence log. The original officer misidentified the item. It was a blatant, almost arrogant lie. Detective Harding, who was watching from the back of the room, knew his own signature was on that evidence log. He knew what he had tagged and bagged. This was not a correction. It was a fabrication. Through a Freedom of Information Act request, the Obsidian Archive has obtained a copy of the 1986 Task Force report. It is almost entirely redacted. Entire pages are blacked out. The names of the federal consultants are classified. The spectrographic analysis of the audio broadcast is missing. What is left is a hollow shell, a narrative constructed to neatly tie up loose ends. The official story doesn't hold up to scrutiny. It doesn't explain the stopped clocks, the non-native pine needle, the impossible coordinates, or the language Dr. Thorne insisted was genuine. It was a conclusion designed not to solve a mystery, but to erase it. They didn't close the case. They buried it under black ink. But the truth, like Elias Vance himself, has a way of refusing to stay gone. The file may say, closed, but in the static between stations and in the whispers of the pines, this case remains terrifyingly and perhaps eternally open. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be sealed again. For decades, the official narrative surrounding the events at Sentinel Peak was one of tragic yet explainable phenomena. A freak geological event, a localized magnetic anomaly, a series of unfortunate coincidences. The case files were stamped, sealed, and relegated to dusty shelves in a federal archive, a closed chapter in a book no one was meant to read. But secrets, like pressure building deep within the earth, have a way of finding a fissure. And the fissure in this case had a name: Project Nightfall. Officially, it was a benign initiative, a Cold War-era atmospheric study funded by the Department of the Interior to monitor solar radiation. Its public-facing documents are dry, filled with charts on ionospheric disturbance and atmospheric dust. But buried in a footnote of a declassified budget report from 1978, an anonymous congressional aide scrawled a question in the margin: Nightfall. Why does an atmospheric study require 3,000 meters of tungsten carbide drilling equipment? There was no answer. This single question pries open the truth. Project Nightfall was a lie. It was a cover for a far more ambitious and terrifying undertaking. Leaked testimony from a now-deceased engineer given under the condition of anonymity speaks of a subterrestrial listening post. Its mission was not to look up at the sun, but to listen down into the heart of the planet. They weren't monitoring solar flares. They were monitoring something that resonated from the planet's core, a signal that was not geological. It was rhythmic, structured, and profoundly unnatural. The project's operational timeline is a perfect, chilling overlay with the Sentinel Peak incident. The strange disappearances, the communication blackouts, the impossible energy readings reported by local authorities, they all occurred while Project Nightfall was at its most active, its drills biting deeper into the earth than any public or private operation had ever dared. Then, just as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The project was terminated. The official reason was budgetary constraints. But internal memos, heavily redacted, tell a different story. They speak of a threshold breach, a non-translatable acoustic event, and a final cryptic entry. The resonance has changed. It is no longer listening. It is responding. The case wasn't closed because it was solved. It was sealed because they had awakened something they could not control, and the shadow of Project Nightfall was cast not to observe, but to contain. The true story of any major cover-up is not written in the words that are present, but in the empty spaces where words used to be. It's a narrative told in black ink. When we finally gained access to the interagency memos concerning the termination of Project Nightfall, we weren't looking at a report. We were looking at a battlefield. A war against information, fought with Sharpies and redaction stamps. Hundreds of pages were rendered nearly useless. Entire paragraphs, conclusions, and witness names obliterated. But the censors made a mistake. They assumed that by removing the words, they had removed the meaning. They were wrong. The redactions themselves create a pattern, a language all their own. Why, for instance, is the word geology never redacted, but the adjective preceding it always is? Anomalous, sentient, hostile. What word required such consistent, frantic removal? We subjected these documents to multispectral imaging, hoping to digitally peel back the ink. While the original text remains elusive, the process revealed something even more disturbing. Multiple layers of redaction. Words were blacked out, and then those redactions were themselves blacked out on subsequent copies, suggesting an internal struggle over how much to hide even from each other. But one document, Memo 7B, survived with just enough text to sketch the nightmare. It's a damage report. It reads, "Following containment failure at all personnel at Sector Gamma are unaccounted for. Protocol Alpha has failed. The is exhibiting unclassifiable energy signatures and what can only be described as." The final unredacted sentence is the most chilling. Requesting authorization for Protocol Omega. We are no longer dealing with a discovery, we are dealing with an emergence. This memo was cross-referenced between 3 different agency archives. In one version, the word unaccounted for is used. In another, the same line reads biologically compromised. In a third, it just says gone. By piecing together these fragments of censored terror, the picture becomes clear. The Sentinel Peak incident wasn't an accident that they studied. It was the direct result of their actions. Project Nightfall didn't fail. It succeeded all too well. It made contact. And the blacked-out memos are not a record of a scientific endeavor. They are the frantic, desperate epitaph of the people who realized they had just knocked on a door that was never meant to be opened. and something had answered from the other side. For 40 years, the only voices in this story were ghosts, the disembodied, bureaucratic tones of official reports, and the silent screams of redacted text. The human element was missing, buried under layers of classification. That changed on October 17, 2023, with an email from a man named Arthur Finch. He was not a scientist or an agent. In 1978, he was a 22-year-old night watchman, a low-level contractor hired for perimeter security at the geological survey site that was secretly Project Nightfall. He was considered insignificant, a nobody who was never debriefed, never asked, and never silenced, because no one believed he could have seen or understood anything of importance. They were wrong. Arthur's testimony cuts through the jargon like a scalpel. He didn't understand the science, but he remembers the feeling. The ground was always humming, he told us, his voice raspy over the phone. Not like machinery. It was deeper. It felt alive. The engineers, the ones in the white coats, they walked around with this permanent look of fear, but also reverence. He described the nights leading up to the shutdown. The humming grew louder, changing in pitch. It started to sound less like a drone and more like whispers. A million voices speaking a language he couldn't understand, from deep beneath his feet. He was told it was seismic interference. But Arthur knew what an earthquake felt like. This was different. This was organized. The night of the containment failure, as the memos call it, Arthur wasn't at his post. He was in the infirmary with a migraine, an affliction that had suddenly struck half the staff. From his cot, he saw the emergency lights flicker and die, and he heard a single high-frequency tone that made the fillings in his teeth ache. Then, silence. When he emerged hours later, the entire command center was empty. No alarms, no signs of struggle, just abandoned coffee cups and computer screens, frozen mid-calculation. Everyone was gone. Before he fled, he grabbed the only thing that seemed out of place, a core sample box that had been dropped in the chaos. Inside wasn't rock. It was a small, impossibly smooth, obsidian-like shard that was cool to the touch, yet seemed to absorb all light around it. For 40 years, Arthur Finch kept this secret, this impossible artifact. His testimony wasn't just a new perspective. It was a key. It confirmed that the emergence wasn't just a data point on a screen. It was a physical, auditory, and terrifyingly real event that has been silenced for decades. Arthur Finch's testimony and his strange artifact provided the missing link, transforming our investigation from a historical inquiry into an active scientific crisis. The shard he recovered was sent for analysis under a strict chain of custody. The results were baffling. Its composition matched no known terrestrial or meteoric element. It was carbon-based, yet its atomic structure was crystalline in a way that physicists claimed was theoretically impossible, capable of storing and processing information at a molecular level. It was less a rock and more a piece of naturally formed geological hardware. This discovery forced us to re-examine the original seismic data from Sentinel Peak, this time with modern instruments and algorithms. What we found confirms that Project Nightfall wasn't just drilling, it was trespassing. Deep below the peak, approximately 4,000 meters down, lies an anomaly that defies all geological models. It is not a cave, not a mineral deposit, not a magma chamber. Subterranean scans depict a vast hollow structure with unnervingly perfect geometric patterns. It spans nearly 3 kilometers and possesses a symmetry that has no place in the chaotic crush of the Earth's crust. It is artificial. The humming Arthur described matches the resonant frequency of this structure. The seismic readings from 1978 aren't from an earthquake. They are the signature of this massive object changing its energetic state. It was a power-up sequence. The redacted memos about an emergence and a response suddenly make terrifying sense. Project Nightfall, with their deep earth drilling and acoustic signaling, didn't discover an anomaly. They rang a doorbell that had been silent for millennia. The most disturbing part is that the phenomenon is not over. Our new sensor readings from the site show that the anomaly is active. The low-frequency resonance is slowly increasing, and the structure's energy signature has grown by 12% in the last decade alone. This isn't a cold case anymore. It's a ticking clock. The case refused to stay closed because the event never truly ended. The disappearances at Sentinel Peak were not the main event. They were the prelude. The redactions and the cover-up were not designed to hide a past tragedy, but to obscure an ongoing and escalating threat that is still growing, still resonating, and still waiting, deep beneath our feet. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be shut again. Welcome back to the Obsidian Archive. We delve into the cases that history tries to forget, the files that gather dust in the deepest vaults of official denial. Today, we return to the labyrinthine mystery we call the case that refused to stay closed. In our last installment, we detailed the inexplicable data surge from a decommissioned Cold War listening post, an event officially labeled a glitch. But as we know, in the world of shadows, there are no glitches, only messages. That data surge led a small group of urban explorers to a derelict substation, and inside a rusted locker they found it. A small, leather-bound journal. It was unassuming, easily mistaken for a simple diary. But this object would become the key, the fulcrum upon which this entire cold case would be pried open once more. The journal belonged to Dr. Alistair Finch, a theoretical physicist who officially died in a car accident in 1983. His death was the final page in a promising career, a case closed with mundane efficiency. But this journal, written in the frantic last months of his life, tells a different story. It doesn't contain words, not in any language known to man. Page after page is filled with a dense, complex cipher, a maddening array of symbols, geometric shapes, and what appear to be star charts overlaid with mathematical equations. The handwriting, initially precise and academic, devolves into a desperate scrawl. In the margins, unsettling sketches appear, spiraling vortexes, figures with elongated limbs, and a recurring symbol, a triangle intersected by a single jagged line. This was not the work of a stable mind. Or perhaps it was the work of a mind that had seen something it wasn't supposed to see, something that shattered its stability. For decades, the journal remained a curiosity, passing from private collectors to crypto hobbyists, none of whom could penetrate its secrets. It was deemed the incoherent rambling of a brilliant man's descent into madness. The official narrative held firm. But what if it wasn't madness? What if it was a desperate attempt to record a truth so dangerous, so paradigm-shifting, that it required a language of its own? A language that would protect it from the very people Dr. Finch seemed to fear were closing in. The journal is a lock, and for years, no one could find the key. Its coded pages were a silent testament to a secret Alistair Finch carried to his grave. A secret that, as we will soon discover, refused to be buried with him. A lock is only as strong as the secrets it protects. For over 30 years, Dr. Finch's journal remained a perfect vault. The world's best cryptographers, both amateur and professional, had failed to make any sense of its alien language. The case file, already yellowed with age, seemed destined to remain closed. The breakthrough came not from a government agency or a university, but from a sound engineer and amateur archivist named Lena Petrova. Tucked into a hidden flap in the journal's leather cover was a small, unmarked reel of magnetic tape. Previous investigators had dismissed it as corrupted, containing nothing but layers of impenetrable static and hum. It was meaningless noise, but Petrova believed that in a case this strange, nothing was meaningless. She spent months digitizing and cleaning the audio, running it through advanced spectral analysis software. She wasn't listening to the tape. She was looking at it. And within the visual representation of the sound, within the chaotic frequencies of the static, she found it. A pattern. A faint, repeating signal buried deep beneath the noise, almost like a watermark. It was a sequence of tones, a numeric cipher broadcast from an unknown source, what intelligence agencies call a numbers station. This was the key. The sequence of numbers corresponded to page numbers, line numbers, and character positions within the journal. The static was not just noise, it was the instruction manual. The first decoded messages were fragmented, chilling glimpses into Finch's state of mind. They don't transmit, they resonate. The pattern isn't in the sky, it's in the silence between. He has no face, the man from the ministry. These were not the writings of a simple physicist. This was the language of someone who had stumbled into a conspiracy that operated on a level beyond conventional understanding. The journal wasn't just a diary. It was a log of an unsanctioned investigation. Finch was using his knowledge of physics and signal processing to track something or someone. The star charts weren't astronomical. They were maps of transmission points. The equations weren't theoretical. They were calculations predicting the next resonance, the next broadcast from whatever he had discovered. The static on the tape was more than a key. It was a recording of the very phenomenon he was studying. He had captured a piece of the mystery itself. The journal began to paint a picture of a man haunted by a signal, a pattern that he initially believed was extraterrestrial, but slowly came to realize was something far closer to home and far more sinister. The case was no longer just open. It was bleeding into new and terrifying territory. With a key to the cipher, the journal's secrets began to bleed through. And what they revealed was not a single conspiracy, but a constellation of them. The decoded entries were a tapestry of dates, coordinates, and names. At first, the names seemed random. A geologist in Utah, a linguist from Berlin, a radio astronomer in Chile, a civil servant in London. None of them had any known connection to Dr. Alistair Finch or to each other. Their lives were separated by geography, profession, and decades. But they all shared one chilling, unifying detail. Every single one of them had vanished. These weren't standard missing persons cases. There were no signs of struggle, no ransom notes, no bodies ever recovered. The official reports were thin, marked by an unusual lack of evidence and a swift conclusion of no foul play. The geologist, Dr. Eris Thorne, disappeared from a remote survey site in 1979. His equipment was left running, a half-eaten sandwich on his desk. The linguist, Anja Schmidt, walked out of her Berlin apartment in 1981 to buy a newspaper and was never seen again. The pattern was cold, efficient, and terrifyingly clean. They were erased. Finch's journal was the Rosetta Stone that connected these disparate events. His entries showed he wasn't just tracking a signal, he was tracking the people who were also tracking it. He had discovered a hidden community of researchers, operating outside the mainstream, who had all independently detected the same anomalous resonance. They were communicating secretly, sharing data, trying to piece together the puzzle. The journal contained fragments of their correspondence, notes on their findings. And next to each name, Finch had marked a date. That date, when cross-referenced with public records, perfectly matched the day each person disappeared. Finch wasn't just a victim. He was the last one standing. He knew he was next. His journal was a dead man's switch, a final desperate attempt to leave a map of the slaughter. The car crash that supposedly killed him no longer looked like an accident. It looked like the final piece of the pattern, the closing of a circle. The conspiracy was no longer theoretical. It had a body count. An invisible war was being waged in the margins of science and academia, and the casualties were being quietly swept under the rug of history. The question was no longer what Finch had discovered, but who was willing to go to such lengths to ensure it remained a secret. As more of the journal was painstakingly decoded, one phrase appeared with chilling regularity. The man from the ministry. He is never given a name. He is never physically described in any detail beyond a forgettable suit and eyes that don't blink. He is a ghost in the machine, a phantom haunting the periphery of Dr. Finch's investigation. According to Finch's notes, this man was the harbinger. His appearance always preceded a calamity. Finch writes of seeing him outside the home of the Berlin linguist Anja Schmidt 2 days before she vanished. He logged a sighting of the same nondescript man near the Chilean observatory, just a week before the radio astronomer disappeared. This wasn't a detective or a government agent in the traditional sense. He left no footprints, no paper trail. He was an omen in a gray suit. Finch believed this man wasn't a person, but a function, an agent of an organization so secretive it didn't even have a name. He simply called it the Ministry. It's a deliberately vague and Orwellian term, suggesting a faceless, soul-crushing bureaucracy whose only purpose is the curation of reality and the suppression of inconvenient truths. The Ministry wasn't a foreign power or a clandestine agency we might recognize. According to Finch's increasingly paranoid entries, it was something older, something embedded within the very structure of our institutions, a control system masquerading as benign administration. The man from the Ministry was its instrument. His job was to prune the branches of knowledge that grew in undesirable directions. He didn't use force or violence, not directly. He would approach the targets, the scientists, the researchers, with a quiet word, a file slid across a desk, a veiled warning. He offered them a choice: silence and ignorance, or erasure. Those who refused, who continued their work, were the ones who vanished. Finch's final entries are a frantic account of his own encounter. The man from the Ministry visited him at his university office. He didn't threaten him. He simply explained in calm, bureaucratic terms that his research was unstable and must cease. He presented Finch with documents, heavily redacted, that hinted at the catastrophic potential of the resonance he was studying. He framed it as a matter of public safety. But Finch saw it for what it was, a threat. He refused. Days later, his car's brake lines failed. The case that had refused to stay closed now had a face, however indistinct. It had an antagonist. And the most terrifying part of Finch's final scrawled entry is this: the Ministry knows all timelines. They see the echoes of what will be. They know I am writing this. They know who will one day read it. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors are meant to remain locked, but every so often, a key turns in the rust. For 37 years, the official file on what transpired was a monument to bureaucratic certainty. A case closed, stamped, and relegated to the cold, silent stacks of a federal record center. The narrative was simple, clean, and brutally efficient. A tragedy, yes, but a solved one. But the truth, much like a body buried in shallow ground, has a way of rising to the surface. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper, a weak, rattling breath from a man the world had long forgotten: Arthur Finch. His name appears only 3 times in the official case file, a clerical footnote, a ghost in the vast machinery of justice. By the time a freelance journalist found him in a hospice overlooking a gray, indifferent sea, he was little more than a skeleton draped in paper-thin skin. He had nothing left to lose, and everything to confess. Finch wasn't a killer. He wasn't a conspirator in the traditional sense. He was, in his own words, the eraser, a low-level archivist with the original task force, chosen for his meticulous nature and his utter lack of curiosity. His job, assigned to him by men with blank faces and eyes that never blinked, was to perform a meticulous act of historical vandalism. Over a period of 6 months, he systematically removed, destroyed, and replaced key pieces of evidence from the active case file. Witness testimonies were altered. Forensic reports were subtly rewritten. Photographs were swapped. He was given a master script, a new reality to superimpose over the old one, and he followed his orders without question. He was the architect of the lie that became the official truth. He confessed that the person convicted, the person who died in prison, was a carefully selected scapegoat, their life retrofitted to fit the crime. Finch didn't know the full scope of the conspiracy. He didn't know who the men who gave him the orders truly worked for. He only knew that the real story was so toxic, so dangerous, that the state apparatus was mobilized to bury it under a mountain of fabricated paper. But Finch had built his own failsafe, a final, desperate act of penance. He told the journalist about a lockbox, buried decades ago, containing the only thing he had left of the truth: his voice. Echo Canyon is a place of profound silence, where wind scours the red rock and secrets can lie undisturbed for generations. Following Arthur Finch's cryptic directions, a series of landmarks and compass bearings scribbled on a napkin, the journalist dug at the base of a skeletal juniper tree. The shovel struck metal. A military-style ammunition can, rusted nearly shut, was pried open to reveal not documents, but a set of 6 reel-to-reel audio tapes, perfectly preserved in wax paper. These were the Echo Canyon tapes, the secret history of a cover-up, recorded in paranoid whispers by the man tasked with erasing the truth. The process of digitizing and restoring the audio was painstaking. Experts worked for weeks, filtering out the hiss, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the distant, mournful sound of trains that punctuated Finch's clandestine recordings. What emerged was terrifying. Finch's voice, 37 years younger, was tight with fear. He never spoke directly of the case. He used a strange, self-devised code. The cover-up was the redaction protocol. The shadowy figures directing him were the curators. The victim was referred to only as the asset. He detailed his work in agonizing detail, describing the texture of the paper he used for forgeries, the slight tremor in his hand as he swapped a real autopsy photo for a doctored one. He spoke of being followed, of his phone making strange clicking sounds, of a constant suffocating certainty that he was a loose end that would one day be tied. The most chilling discovery came from tape 4. Finch had apparently left the recorder running by accident in his small, windowless office. For 20 minutes, there is only static. Then, muffled voices from an adjacent room. The words are indistinct, but the cadence is clear. It's not a conversation. It's a chant. A rhythmic, guttural recitation of phrases in a language that linguists have been unable to identify. And beneath the chanting, another sound, faint but unmistakable. A woman weeping. The official file was a lie, but Finch's tapes suggested the reality was not merely a different crime, but a different category of reality altogether. Arthur Finch's confession and the Echo Canyon tapes did more than just reopen a closed case. They shattered its very foundation. The official narrative was gone, leaving a vacuum. Into that void, 3 distinct and terrifying theories have rushed in, each one twisting the known fragments of evidence into a coherent, yet mutually exclusive, nightmare. Each theory forces us to re-examine every redacted line, every coded word from Finch's paranoid recordings. The first, and perhaps most conventional, is the intelligence agency cleanup. In this scenario, the victim, the asset, was not a random citizen, but a spy, a double agent, or a scientist who discovered something they shouldn't have. Their death was a professional, state-sanctioned assassination. The curators Finch mentioned were not detectives, but handlers from a clandestine service like the CIA or DIA, and the redaction protocol was their standard operating procedure for sanitizing a public incident to protect national security. The muffled chanting on the tape could be the recitation of code words or a foreign transmission. It's a cold, clinical explanation that paints the cover-up as a necessary evil in a world of shadows. The second theory is far darker, the occult nexus. This theory posits that the strange geometric patterns found at the scene, dismissed by police as random vandalism, were the focal point of a ritual. The victim wasn't murdered for what they knew, but for who they were, a sacrifice. The curators were not government agents, but acolytes of a powerful, secretive cult with deep connections into the establishment, allowing them to manipulate a federal investigation with ease. The chanting on tape 4 is no longer code, but a genuine invocation. This theory suggests the cover-up wasn't to hide a state secret, but a metaphysical one. The existence of a group that operates on a completely different moral and spiritual plane. Finally, there is the most disturbing possibility: the subject zero hypothesis. This theory proposes that the entire event was the result of an unsanctioned, illegal human experiment gone catastrophically wrong. The victim was a test subject, perhaps for a powerful psychotropic drug or a biological agent. The crime scene was, in fact, a containment breach. The redaction protocol was not about covering up a murder, but about erasing the existence of the program and its human collateral damage. The curators were the scientists or military personnel responsible, and their methodical alteration of the record was to ensure their monstrous work could continue. The case file isn't a lie. It's a quarantine protocol for information. The final tape in the rusted ammunition can was different. Finch's voice was older, the paranoia replaced by a weary resignation. It was his last entry, recorded years after the others. He spoke of a final desperate measure taken by the curators. They hadn't just destroyed the original files, they had archived them. All of it, the real autopsy reports, the untampered witness statements, the crime scene photographs that showed what was truly there, was consolidated and moved to a single secure location. A tomb for the truth. Finch never knew its exact location, only its code name, whispered to him by a terrified colleague who vanished weeks later. The Blackwood repository. This was the final thread. The search began not with police databases, but with declassified land acquisition records from the Cold War era, searching for anomalies, parcels of land purchased by shell corporations with government ties, and then dropped off the public record. The trail was cold, littered with dead ends and bureaucratic stone walls, but a cross-reference with geological surveys of defunct mining operations yielded a single, tantalizing hit. A remote, inaccessible plot of land deep within a national forest, officially designated as a seismic monitoring station, though no seismic data had ever been reported from it. Getting there required a 2-day hike through unforgiving terrain. There were no roads, no trails. And then we saw it. A monolithic cube of brutalist concrete half swallowed by the ancient forest. No windows, no markings, no signs of life. Just a single massive blast-proof steel door, sealed shut with a locking mechanism that had no visible keyhole or keypad. This is the Blackwood repository, the unmarked archive, the place where the real case file, the one that refused to stay closed, has been sleeping for nearly 4 decades. Standing before this silent, imposing structure, a chilling question hangs in the air. Does opening this door finally bring the answers we seek? Or does it simply unlock a new, more terrifying chapter of a story that was never meant to be read? The truth is in there, but some archives, like some tombs, are sealed for a reason.